Phyllida was brought up or trained in an era where there were specific rules about the making of art, and one of them was around truth to materials. You would work with materials, you would go with what they did best. And it was almost a kind of moralizing around that certain works required a certain type of material. She was a sculptor, but she sculpted in space, with space as well as with materials. Her work embraced traditions of theatre and the cinema and opera. Her work is embedded in a particular kind of looking, and that looking seems to be bound into a particular kind of literature. It is a kind of grand statement of her ambition to make complex and perplexing and restless objects that don't conform to anything one has seen before. And that's the extraordinary thing about Barlow. There's no late work. This is just the last work, but there's nothing late about it. It's as fresh and complex as, in a way, as the student work that she endlessly looked back to and commented on. It is gorgeous, isn't it? The opportunity of making an exhibition after somebody has left the scene is that you can begin to open up the career with great respect to the artist's intentions, but to provide ways in that might not have been the ways in that Phyllida would always have foregrounded. There was also this sort of secondary story, which was about the work in the world, both responding to bigger spaces, where the work becomes a kind of choreography of the space, but also responding to the condition of the world. What we have tried to do is bring together elements, really key elements from a number of works that commissions over the last 15 years or so, and bring them together using the kind of methodologies that she invented for herself. So, for example, she had a particular attitude to threshold spaces. Most artists like people to walk into the galleries and see the exhibition unfold, and with sight lines and things carefully spaced. It's a very traditional way of setting up a show. But what Phyllida loved doing was she liked blocking. She wanted to prevent the view, and I think she wanted to prevent the view not necessarily to create a sense of theatrical reveal, but also to make you very aware of the space. Unscripted has that wonderful sense of expansive, an ability to respond in an untutored or unplanned way to the incidental. And I would say that for Phyllida, the incidental both included the materials that she used with and what they would do, but actually also included what was on TV that night, or, she responded to events in the world that I think was unscripted. She had this strange ability to hold an attention towards really complicated ideas around art and form, but hold them in balance with news that was coming in. When you knew that Phyllida was going to do a show, you didn't know what you were going to end up with. You knew it would be unscripted. But by the time it was finished, there was definitely a script. This is a great wall from one of 3 great walls that was included in her project for the Venice Biennial British Pavilion in 2017. And that she used in that pavilion to block the way through, to hold the viewer in a kind of state of suspension almost. So it's a very choreographed experience, and she loved theatre, and I think she thought very carefully about staging. And that, staging, in a stage set, the things you make become the props, and the props in a drama, which really is about how the viewer becomes part of that drama. So this room that we're in here now is like a collage of sculptural elements or props that Phyllida Barlow made over 3 or 4 separate projects. They've been brought together with a kind of sensitivity for, as I said, her methodology. So Phyllida often talked about the way that she would make objects that refer to real things in the real world, and she called them phantom objects. So they're not exact replicas, but there's sufficient reference to provide recognition, and they have a presence. So they connect you to a real experience, a real memory, a real world, but they still occupy the kind of very special place of art. She had a hatred of what she called the pictorial, the idea that something was sort of static. So you can see that she was really experimenting with how do you break the static in 2 dimensions. She's using shadows and different types of gesture and touch and brushstroke. So she's teaching herself how to be a painter. She loved precarity, she loved imbalance, she loved doing the impossible, but to make the impossible possible, she had to do some test making. So these little maquettes just show you how she does it. How do you support this ungainly structure on matchsticks? How do you make a tower of blobby bits of concrete that's not going to fall over? How do you make something that's hollow out of solid planks? Being in the studio was a process of making and unfolding, taking an idea for a walk, taking a material, pushing it to its extremes, doing something incredibly weird like putting horrible foam rubber together with concrete and seeing the outcome. And this is really a sense of her mind at play in the most open and relaxed way. There are also other significant forms that recur in a way throughout her career. And this work, she loved putting materials together that were very different, that challenged each other. She loved putting genres together that challenged each other, like painting and sculpture. Within sculpture, she loved putting, organic with geometric. But this is more about a relationship between forms that are very similar and different. And they're both forms that are themselves, each one is a double act of a kind of global, a globe, a blob. This one's pretty ballsy. These are entrails, and they probably are balls, and they do speak of issues around gender and love, and she was very open, and I think she would have been open to the most extraordinary interpretations and would not have said no, because she knew she was kind of like opening in a way, a Pandora's box, because she was using materials that really don't reveal themselves in art very often. The kind of stuff that you pump between walls in cheap houses and chicken wire and rope. None of those things have really art world associations, so they only have the associations that artists can't control them. They're slippery things, and she did make slippery things. It's that sort of like comfortable, everyday, beautiful rural environment that these works have kind of crash landed into. And I think they were made deliberately to have a sense of incongruity. And they take us right back to Phyllida's work of the 1990s, when she tried to make sculptures that would deliberately disrupt a kind of sense of domestic comfort. I spent very many really extraordinary hours with her, opposite her on her kitchen table. And, after 3 or 4 hours, she'd say, "You look tired. Are you hungry?" Always very caring and attentive. She was a complex, ordinary, but fascinatingly not ordinary person all at the same time. She took everything and challenged it. She never accepted something at face value. She wanted to go behind it, take it apart, interrogate it, and put it back together in a different way.